The 9,552nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel, Qatar, and Tunisia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in this meeting, in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/173, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Algeria. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to extend my sincere appreciation for your efforts in convening this meeting to deliberate and take action on the draft resolution S 2024-173. The draft resolution under consideration is the culmination of extensive discussions among Council members. As the primary custodian of international peace and security, the Security Council cannot afford passivity in face of the call for a ceasefire in Gaza. By presenting this text, our intention is to empower the Council to fulfill its mandate and protect lives, commencing with an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Ample time have been afforded for Council members to deliberate on the content of the text. Our approach involved meticulous consideration of received proposal and amendment, resulting in what we believe is a balanced text, capable of garnering broad support. The draft resolution underscores key elements, including 1. A humanitarian ceasefire. 2nd, unhindered aid delivery to all parts of the Gaza Strip. 3rd, rejection of forced displacement of Palestinians. 4, compliance with provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice. And 5th and last, the imperative for all parties to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Madam President, throughout this process, we have heard calls to give time to a parallel track. in order to preserve its chances, with concern raised that any action from the Council would jeopardize this effort. However, almost 1 month after the ICG orders, signs of hope are still absent for improvement of the situation in Gaza. Silence. Silence, we contend, is not a viable option. Now is the time for action and the time for truth. Madam President, members of the Security Council bear the responsibility of voting in favor of measures that uphold international peace and security. This resolution is a stance for truth and humanity, standing against the advocates for murder and hatred. A vote in favor of this draft resolution is a support to the Palestinians' right to life. Conversely, voting against it implies an endorsement of the brutal violence and collective punishment inflicted upon them. A positive vote for the draft brings hope for hundreds of thousands of children to return to school and enjoy their right to education. Conversely, voting against the draft resolution is a vote in favor of annihilating their dream for a better life. A vote in favor of the draft resolution stands in solidarity with the right of Palestinian women, while opposing it means to accept degrading practices that destroy their dignity. Furthermore, supporting the draft resolution means endorsing the Palestinian right to food. Rejecting it constitutes, however, an approval of starvation as mean of war against hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. A vote in favor of the draft is a defense of the right to health, while voting against it is an approval of violation of hospital sanctity and an announced death of those who escaped it in the first place. Madam President, the Council must not merely call for a ceasefire. It must ensure steadfast adherence by all parties. The international community must act swiftly, as the value of ceasefire diminishes with each passing moment. We are rapidly approaching a critical juncture where the call to halt the machinery of violence will lose its significance. Today, every Palestinian is a target for death, extermination, and genocide. We should ask ourselves, how many innocent lives must be sacrificed before the Council deems it necessary to call for a ceasefire. For us, and I hope for all the security members, I hope for all the Security Council members, Palestinians, Palestinian lives matter. Each one of us decide where to stand in this tragic chapter of history. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Colleagues, for months, the United States has tirelessly pushed toward a goal that all of us should aspire to: a sustainable resolution of the Gaza conflict so that Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side and enjoy equal measures of security, dignity, and freedom. To build towards that future, the United States is working on a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, along with Egypt and Qatar. This hostage deal would bring an immediate and sustained period of calm to Gaza for at least 6 weeks. And from there, we could take the time to build a more enduring peace. President Biden has had multiple calls in recent days with Prime Minister Netanyahu, as well as the leaders of Egypt and Qatar, to push this deal forward. And though gaps remain, the key elements are on the table so that if an arrangement is reached, it would help create the conditions for sustainable cessation of hostilities, which I know all of us would like to see. Of course, we want this deal to happen as soon as possible, as is shown by our exhaustive efforts. But sometimes hard diplomacy takes more time than any of us might like. Believe me, I understand the desire for the Council to act urgently, to positively shape the situation in line with the Security Council's mandate. Still, that desire cannot blind us to the reality of the situation on the ground. And it cannot come at the expense of undermining the only, and let me repeat, the only path available toward a longer, durable peace. And that is why you've heard me say over and over again, any action this Council takes right now should help, not hinder these sensitive and ongoing negotiations. And we believe that the resolution on the table right now would, in fact, negatively impact those negotiations. Demanding an immediate, unconditional ceasefire without an agreement requiring Hamas to release the hostages will not bring about a durable peace. Instead, it could extend the fighting between Hamas and Israel, extend the hostages' time in captivity, an experience described by former hostages as hell, and extend the dire humanitarian crisis Palestinians are facing in Gaza. None of us want that. And so I reiterate the United States' belief that while numerous parties engage in sensitive negotiations, this is not the time for this resolution, which jeopardizes these efforts. Colleagues, I communicated our concerns publicly and privately over the last several weeks. We've submitted numerous rounds of edits. All were ignored. And so for that reason, the United States has offered an alternative resolution that would do what this text does not: pressure Hamas to take the hostage deal that is on the table and help secure a pause that allows humanitarian assistance to reach Palestinian civilians in desperate need. Again, there's much more we all agree on, and the alternative resolution put forward by the United States is rooted in those shared beliefs. To start, in line with President Biden's comments last week, our text calls for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza as soon as practicable, based on the formula of all hostages being released. Last I checked, no one here opposes this. A majority of us also agree that it's time for this council to condemn Hamas. We know because you provided that feedback to Russia on its PRST and to Algeria on its resolution, a feedback that was inexplicably ignored. Should the US resolution be adopted, it would be the first to condemn Hamas for the abhorrent attacks of October 7th, including the sexual violence documented that day. The US text also makes clear that Hamas has no place in future governance of Gaza, nor does Hamas represent the dignity or self-determination of the Palestinian people. Again, all things I believe we agree on. In addition, our draft states there can be no reduction of territory in the Gaza Strip and rejects, as we have before in Resolution 2720, any forced displacements of civilians in Gaza. It also highlights the concerns many council members have regarding the fate of civilians in Rafah, making clear that under current circumstances, a major ground offensive into Rafah should not proceed. Colleagues, this is not, as some members have claimed, an American effort to cover for an imminent ground incursion. Rather, it is a sincere statement of our concern for the 1.5 million civilians who've sought refuge in Rafah. Civilians must be protected and have access to humanitarian assistance and basic services. On that note, our text outlines a path for implementation of Resolution 2712 and 2720, including provisions that call for the expansion of aid at scale. It also further clarifies and strengthens the mandate of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Sigrid Kaag, whose plan I know we all support. As in previous resolutions, it places an emphasis on the protection of civilians and humanitarian workers, and it calls for lifting all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance, opening additional humanitarian routes, and keeping current border crossings open. Our draft also aims to support the Secretary General's effort to investigate those UNRWA personnel who directly participated in October 7th, and it supports the work of the independent review group led by Catherine Colonna, focused on ensuring UNRWA's neutrality. These and other steps are necessary to restore donor confidence. Finally, and as always, the draft reiterates our unwavering commitment to the vision of the two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace, within secure and recognized borders, under a revamped and revitalized Palestinian Authority. Colleagues, this resolution reflects the many ideas that have been shared over the past month, but which are not reflected in the text before us today. And we believe it will both support the ongoing negotiations and lay the groundwork for a sustainable peace in the region. But in addition to getting the what of this text correct, we also know it's critical to get the how and when of it right too. We will work in earnest in negotiating this text, and indeed intend to leave time for everyone to comment rather than impose an arbitrary deadline for the vote. Colleagues, we're at a pivotal moment and a critical one. Critical for the hostages who've been held captive for nearly 20 weeks in Gaza, and critical for their families who are desperate to be reunited with their loved ones. Critical for Palestinians whose homes and families have been destroyed and who now wonder where they'll find their next meal. Critical for Israelis, many of whom are still displaced or face barrages of rocket fire. Critical for Palestinian civilians in the West Bank who are at heightened risk of extremist settler violence. Critical for humanitarian workers and journalists who put their lives on the line every day to do their jobs. And critical to everyone who desperately want to see sustainable peace in this region. That includes, I believe, every single person in this room. And so let us commit to doing this the right way and at the right time so that we can create the right conditions for a safer, more peaceful future. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, вот уже 5-й месяц в Газе разворачивается беспрецедентное насилие, масштабы которого превзошли любые конфликты, с которыми человечество сталкивалось после Второй мировой войны. Счет погибших мирных жителей подбирается к шокирующей отметке в 30 тысяч. И это только посчитанных. Все это время Совет Безопасности ООН не может принять критически важное решение с требованием о немедленном прекращении огня. Хочу напомнить, что 16 октября прошлого года, когда России был предложен самый первый проект резолюции с таким призывом, количество погибших палестинцев было около 1000 человек. Тогда западные делегации в Совете предпочли массово воздержаться, чтобы не навлечь гнев Вашингтона. Коллеги, не будет преувеличением сказать, что новые 28 с лишним тысяч погибших – это цена того самого первого позорного бездействия, коллективной безответственности западных делегаций в Совете Безопасности, у которых натовская солидарность перевешивает любые высокие национальные декларации о приверженности международному гуманитарному праву, защите гражданских лиц и гуманитарного персонала. С тех пор Соединенные Штаты трижды применяли право вето, чтобы не допустить принятия Советом требования о прекращении огня. Каждый раз мы слышали от американской делегации одни и те же лицемерные призывы еще немного подождать, дать время для их якобы эффективной двусторонней дипломатии на земле. Но никакого результата она так и не принесла. Да и не могла принести, так как реальная цель Вашингтона не мир на Ближнем Востоке и не защита мирных жителей, а обеспечение своих геополитических интересов, требующих любой ценой выгородить своего ближайшего ближневосточного союзника. Поэтому Вашингтон, продавив в резолюции Совета Безопасности 2720 фактическую лицензию Израиля на убийство палестинцев на оккупированных палестинских территориях, под предлогом, цитирую, создания условий для прекращения боевых действий, о чем мы предупреждали, продолжает обеспечивать международную защиту властям Западного Иерусалима и их безнаказанность за многочисленные преступления против газовитян. Уважаемые коллеги, делегация Алжира от имени арабской группы предложила солидный, сбалансированный проект резолюции, в центре которого долгожданное прекращение огня. Алжирские коллеги добросовестно организовали переговорный процесс, консультировались со всеми делегациями и старались максимально учесть их замечания. Хотим отдельно отметить профессионализм алжирской переговорной команды. Однако делегация Соединенных Штатов на этот раз с самого начала фактически поставила ультиматум, требуя остановить работу над документом. Наши американские коллеги утверждали, что представленный Алжиром проект опасен, так как может помешать деликатной дипломатии на земле. Только что мы слышали то же самое в этом зале. Призываю вас всех вдуматься в цинизм этого аргумента. Фактически Вашингтон заявляет, что Совет Безопасности ООН стоит на пути его планов и требует от него не мешаться под ногами. А моя коллега, американская коллега, еще вчера публично заявила, что на голосовании будет выступать против алжирского документа.
Уважаемые коллеги, Соединенные Штаты раз за разом демонстрируют полное пренебрежение как к международным институтам и многосторонней дипломатии, так и к международному праву. Сегодня на кону, по сути, авторитет Совета Безопасности ООН. Призываем членов Совета Безопасности продемонстрировать солидарность в противостоянии с произволом Вашингтона, который готов на любые жертвы в любом регионе для реализации своих геополитических амбиций. Американское правительство не заботит ни жизни газовитян, ни мнения их собственного народа, где все громче звучат голоса в поддержку палестинцев. Хочется верить, что в государствах других членов Совета Безопасности все же принято прислушиваться, если не к голосу совести, то хотя бы к общественному мнению. А оно больше не простит Организации Объединенных Наций бездействия. Ситуация на юге сектора вокруг города Рафах в контексте военных планов Израиля крайне опасна. Их реализация приведет к катастрофическому разрастанию масштабов гуманитарного бедствия, в эпицентре которого окажутся более миллиона жителей сектора Газа, бежавших от боевых действий в этот город на границе с Египтом. Необходимо сделать все возможное для предотвращения такого развития событий. Наша общая задача – как можно скорее остановить кровопролитие и обеспечить условия для налаживания устойчивых каналов оказания гуманитарной помощи населению анклава. Призываем членов Совета Безопасности проголосовать в поддержку алжирского проекта. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/173 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 13 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, over the past few weeks, we have made incredibly clear that the resolution before the Council would not achieve the goal of a sustainable peace and may in fact run counter to it. Proceeding with a vote today was wishful and irresponsible. And so while we cannot support a resolution that would put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, we look forward to engaging on a text that we believe will address so many of the concerns we all share, a text that can and should be adopted by the Council so that we can have a temporary ceasefire as soon as practicable based on the formula of all hostages being released. This temporary ceasefire is critical to getting aid into the hands of Palestinian civilians who desperately need it. We should look towards this text so that we can finally condemn Hamas for their horrific attacks on October 7th, which set this conflict into motion, so that we can empower Senior Coordinator Cog and the United Nations, because her success is the UN's success. And it is so very needed to ensure civilians get the aid that they need more efficiently and effectively, and just more, period. And so that ultimately we can together help create a future in which Israelis and Palestinians live in states of their own side by side in peace. We're committed to engaging constructively on our resolution with you all in the days to come to that end. And we will continue to tirelessly engage in direct diplomacy and negotiations on the ground. Thank you.
Representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席女士。主席女士，中方对刚才的决议草案投了赞成票。我们对决议草案遭到美国的否决表示强烈不满和失望。阿尔及利亚代表阿拉伯国家提出决议草案，要求在加沙立即实现停火，立即释放全部人质，保障人道物资准入，反对强制转移。这既是形势的紧迫需要，也是基于人道最起码的要求，理应得到安理会所有成员的支持。阿尔及利亚展现出理性、真诚、开放的态度，就决议草案同各方进行长时间、广泛的磋商，采取了许多建设性意见，让草案内容更加平衡。今天的表决结果清楚说明，在加沙停火止战问题上，不是安理会没有压倒性共识，而是美国行使否决扼杀了安理会的共识。美国的否决释放了错误信号，把加沙局势推到了更危险的境地。正当安理会停火决议被否决时，加沙的无辜百姓正在战火中丧命，正在死亡边缘挣扎。美国声称安理会决议会干扰正在开展的外交努力，这种说法是完全站不住脚的。当前形势下，在立即停火问题上仍然消极回避，无异于为继续杀戮大开绿灯。正当安理会停火决议被否决时，冲突外溢正在使整个中东地区动荡不安，更大范围的战争风险正在上升。只有熄灭加沙战火，才能防止吞噬整个地区的地狱之火。安理会必须尽快采取行动，阻止这场中东浩劫。正当安理会停火决议被否决时，国际法的底线正在遭到践踏，多边体系基石正在遭到侵蚀。联合国秘书长已经援引宪章第99条致函安理会，国际法院也发布了临时措施，对于加沙冲突中严重违反国际法和国际人道法的行为，安理会必须予以有力回应，维护国际法治的权威。主席女士，安理会必须采取行动，推动实现停火，这不应该是一个还需要争辩的问题，而是安理会不容推迟的道德义务，是安理会必须承担的法律义务，更是安理会履行联合国宪章的政治要求。否决不能掩盖停火止战的强烈呼声，安理会维护正义、履行职责的脚步不会因此停顿。中方敦促以色列倾听国际社会的呼声，取消对拉法的进攻计划，停止对巴勒斯坦民众的集体惩罚。我们期待有重要影响的国家少一些政治算计， 真正秉持公正和负责任态度，为推动加沙停火做出正确选择。我们呼吁国际社会汇聚一切外交努力，给加沙民众活下去的机会，给整个中东地区人民拥有和平的机会，给伸张正义一个机会。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We voted for the resolution because the killing of civilians in Gaza must stop. The suffering that Palestinians are enduring is beyond anything a human being should be subjected to. A possible Israeli ground offensive in Rafah would have unimaginable humanitarian consequences. It would push us on a path of no return. It is our duty to react before we wake up in a nightmare. And that's why we are convinced it is high time for the Council to pull a brake. Let me emphasize once again that Slovenia condemns the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on 7 of October, as well as their continuing attacks on Israel. We continue to call for immediate and safe release of all hostages. We feel the pain of their relatives and loved ones. And we thank the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States for their tireless efforts, and we hope that negotiations they are facilitating will soon bring peace to Gaza and return the hostages home safely. However, it is the responsibility of this Council to maintain international peace and security. We believe that everyone can and should contribute their piece of the puzzle that will eventually bring peace. We believe in complementarity of all efforts, bilateral, regional, or those of the Council. The Council's role is important, and it is indispensable in order to end hostilities, to bring hostages home, to rapidly and safely deliver humanitarian assistance, and to draft a day-after roadmap. Lastly, the Council has a responsibility towards the international community. Its expectations have been clearly expressed through a General Assembly resolution with the overwhelming support of Member States. It has been clearly manifested by citizens across the globe. Their voices are loud and clear. The war needs to stop. The Security Council needs to hear these voices of global consciousness and respond to their demands and pleas. And it all starts with a call for a ceasefire, to end hostilities, to bring hostages home, to bring water and food to starving Palestinians, and to silence and clear the skies over Gaza and Israel. A call addressed to both sides, Israel and Hamas. It is our firm belief that Algeria proposed a balanced text, calling for respect of international humanitarian law and human rights law, addressing all violations committed by both sides of the conflict, and calling for accountability for those violations. It is putting protection of civilians as a civilized norm in the center of our action. We therefore deeply regret that the Council was not able to pass this resolution, which we supported strongly. But we cannot give up. It is our responsibility to continue working towards a consensus in this body for peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. La Suisse a voté en faveur du projet de résolution et regrette qu'il n'ait pas été adopté malgré le très large soutien dont il bénéficie parmi les membres de ce Conseil. Je tiens à remercier les efforts de la délégation algérienne dans la recherche de consensus autour de ce texte, qui demande notamment un cessez-le-feu humanitaire immédiat à Gaza et la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages retenus captifs à Gaza depuis les actes de terreur perpétrés par le Hamas le 7 octobre. Depuis la soumission de la première version de ce texte, près de 3 semaines ont passé. La Suisse a salué les intenses négociations qui se déroulent dans la région et a souligné qu'il fallait leur laisser le temps nécessaire pour aboutir à un résultat. En même temps, nous avons insisté sur la responsabilité de ce Conseil d'agir conformément à son mandat pour le respect du droit international humanitaire et surtout la protection des civils. Nous regrettons qu'une condamnation plus ferme et explicite des actes de terreur du Hamas n'ait été retenue dans la résolution, malgré les injonctions de plusieurs membres du Conseil, dont la Suisse. Toutefois, la nécessité de protéger la population civile à Gaza augmente de jour en jour. Le respect du droit international humanitaire et des droits humains, notamment en ce qui concerne la protection des civils, doit rester une priorité de ce Conseil. En vertu des conventions de Genève, l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire doit être sûr, rapide et sans entrave. Nous ne pouvons admettre que des centaines de milliers de civils assiégés soient laissés en proie à la famine et aux épidémies, sans garantie de sécurité adéquate, que ce soit pour la fourniture de l'assistance humanitaire et pour leur propre protection. De plus, la Suisse est très préoccupée par le risque d'une opération militaire d'envergure à Rafah et de l'escalade régionale ultérieure qu'elle pourrait entraîner. Le projet de résolution revêtait ainsi un caractère préventif par rapport à une nouvelle escalade sur place qui met en danger la vie de tous les civils, y inclus les otages. C'est pourquoi l'appel à un cessez-le-feu humanitaire immédiat à Gaza s'inscrit dans la logique de notre engagement collectif à respecter et faire respecter les conventions de Genève et le droit international humanitaire en toutes circonstances. La Suisse reste engagée pour une action unifiée du Conseil en ce sens. Nous rappelons en outre que les parties sont tenues de respecter les 2 précédentes résolutions de ce Conseil à ce sujet. Et nous rappelons également la nature obligatoire des mesures conservatoires que la Cour internationale de justice a ordonnées le 26 janvier dernier. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente, la France remercie l'Algérie d'avoir proposé cette résolution. Elle regrette qu'elle n'ait pas pu être adoptée compte tenu de la situation catastrophique sur le terrain. La libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de tous les otages, demandée explicitement par les résolutions 2712 et 2720, tout comme par le projet qui vient d'être rejeté, doit intervenir sans plus de délai. Il y a urgence à conclure un accord sur un cessez-le-feu qui garantisse enfin la protection de tous les civils et l'entrée massive et sans entrave de l'aide d'urgence. Le bilan humain et la situation humanitaire à Gaza sont intolérables et les opérations israéliennes doivent cesser. Il est urgent d'acheminer massivement l'aide humanitaire à la population de Gaza. Il est impératif d'ouvrir le port d'Ashdod, une voie terrestre directe depuis la Jordanie et tous les points de passage. Il est inacceptable que ce Conseil n'ait toujours pas condamné les actes terroristes commis par le Hamas et d'autres groupes terroristes le 7 octobre, ainsi que les violences sexuelles utilisées comme arme de guerre par ces terroristes. La France le déplore et appelle ce Conseil à sortir rapidement de cette coupable ambiguïté. Elle rappelle son attachement indéfectible à la sécurité d'Israël et elle rappelle aussi sa solidarité avec le peuple israélien après ces attaques terroristes. La France continuera de s'engager résolument dans la voie d'une mobilisation de ce Conseil sur l'ensemble des volets de la crise, sécuritaire, humanitaire, mais aussi politique. La France rappelle que seule la solution des 2 États est à même de répondre aux besoins de sécurité d'Israël et du peuple israélien, ainsi qu'aux aspirations légitimes des Palestiniens à un État. Elle implique la création d'un État palestinien vivant dans la paix et la sécurité aux côtés d'Israël. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, I wish to begin by expressing our gratitude to the presidency of Guyana for having convened this meeting to take action on this important resolution on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We also express our sincere appreciation to Algeria for the tireless work that led to the tabling of the resolution aimed at ending the totally unacceptable and unbearable suffering of the Palestinian people, the humanitarian catastrophe currently unfolding in Gaza. Madam President, by voting in favor of this Security Council resolution, Mozambique aligns herself with the international community as a whole in its effort that overwhelmingly calls for the immediate cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip. We consider it imperative that all parties scrupulously comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and international law, human rights law, in particular with regard to the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructures. We strongly call for the total and full compliance with the provisional measures laid down by the order of the International Court of Justice within the scope of Articles 2 and 3 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, handed down on January 26, 2024. Throughout history, we had our share of painful experience with war and armed conflict. It is on this basis and on the dictates of the laws of war that we embrace that Mozambique firmly opposes the forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population, women and children in particular. In that connection, we strongly appeal for the full implementation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions 2712 of 2023 and 2720 also of 2023. In the same vein, Mozambique demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as a guarantee of humanitarian access to meet the medical needs of all hostages. Mr. President, Madam President, we urge the international community and this Security Council in particular to continue working tirelessly together towards achieving peace and stability in the region based on a two-state solution for the people of Palestine and Israel. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea voted in favor of the resolution proposed by Algeria, considering the urgent need for a humanitarian ceasefire to end the suffering of civilians in Gaza. Right now in Rafah, where more than half of the entire population of Gaza is densely packed, people are panicking at a looming catastrophe that may be caused by a full-scale ground operation. The Republic of Korea could not ignore the possibility of another humanitarian calamity that will lead to a huge number of fatalities. Nonetheless, we adhere to our position that the heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October is a direct cause of the current disaster in Gaza. Thus, it is regrettable that a clear and unified condemnation of the deplorable terrorist acts perpetrated by Hamas was missing in the draft resolution. Madam President, the Republic of Korea takes note that serious negotiations among key stakeholders, namely Egypt, Qatar, US, and Israel, are vigorously ongoing on the ground to achieve the long overdue release of the hostages. We express our strong support and appreciation for these efforts. The Republic of Korea will continue to engage in Council deliberations actively and constructively to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, as well as the realization of the two-state solution. I thank you.
Representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. It has been over 4 months of devastation, hostilities, and suffering since Hamas' horrifying acts of terror against Israel. We are witnessing an alarming escalation of violence and unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe. The situation on the ground is only worsening as each day goes by. Particularly, the situation in Rafah is deeply concerning. Japan appreciates the ongoing tireless diplomatic efforts led by US and other countries towards the release of hostages, improving the humanitarian situation, and calming down the situation as soon as possible. Japan believes that humanitarian ceasefire needs to be realized promptly in such a way to ensure a conducive environment for sufficient humanitarian assistance activities, as well as to lead to the release of the remaining hostages, therefore resulting in realization of a sustainable ceasefire. Based on this position, we call on all the parties concerned to act immediately from a humanitarian viewpoint. In this vein, Japan voted in favor of this draft resolution. We would like to express our gratitude to Algeria for their efforts to coordinate various positions among the Council members. At the same time, in efforts to ensure a more fair and balanced text, the resolution should have included a condemnation of Hamas terrorist attacks, which the Security Council has so far failed to speak out. Though we couldn't agree on a resolution which all the Council members can support, we are all engaging seriously to stop the violence. This Council should be a place to explore and find a peace and security jointly, not a place to aim for finger pointing. Japan will continue to work constructively with other Council members to find a path forward for peace and stability in the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta also thanks Algeria for their measured and constructive approach as penholders throughout the negotiations. Malta voted in favor of this draft, and we unequivocally reiterate our call for a permanent ceasefire. It is therefore regrettable that the use of the veto prevents this Council from calling for an end to this conflict. We also believe that the Council has provided the ongoing negotiations taking place on the ground the necessary space and time. However, regrettably, we still find ourselves on the precipice of another wave of hostilities. This will undoubtedly have catastrophic consequences on the civilian population in Rafah, an area already designated as a safe zone. We also reject and denounce any forced displacement of the Palestinian civilian population from and within Gaza. Such actions amount to grave breaches of international law. The severely deteriorating humanitarian conditions and the threat of famine within Gaza are extremely troubling and need to be urgently addressed. Israel is required to facilitate the full, rapid, safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. At the same time, UNRWA remains essential to ensure an effective humanitarian response. The broader regional situation also continues to be deeply worrying. Under these circumstances, the full and immediate implementation of Security Council Resolutions 2712 and 2720 is now more pressing than ever. Let us be clear, this Council has the duty and responsibility to make sure that its decisions are respected. We also echo the call for the remaining hostages to be immediately, safely, and unconditionally released, and we call on this Council to denounce the terrorist acts of October 7th. In closing, President, Malta underlines its unwavering commitment to a comprehensive peace based on the two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. We want to see the fighting in Gaza end as soon as possible in a way that never again allows Hamas to carry out the appalling terrorist attacks against Israel we saw on the 7th of October last year. Palestinian civilians are facing a devastating humanitarian crisis. We're particularly worried about the situation in Rafah, where a military operation could have appalling consequences for civilians sheltering there with nowhere else to go. Ongoing negotiations are critical to secure the release of the hostages held in Gaza. We are calling for an immediate suspension in fighting to get aid in and hostages out, leading to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. That means the release of all hostages, the formation of a new Palestinian government for the West Bank and Gaza, accompanied by an international support package, removing Hamas's capacity to launch attacks against Israel, Hamas no longer in charge of Gaza, and a political horizon which provides a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution. President, we welcome the efforts of our Algerian colleagues on this resolution, and we regret that some of our proposals were not taken on board. Simply calling for a ceasefire, as this resolution does, will not make it happen. Indeed, as it could endanger the hostage negotiations, it could actually make a ceasefire less likely. The way to stop the fighting and potentially stop it from restarting is to begin with a pause to get hostages out and aid in. That is what we are calling for. It could end the fighting now. We will continue to work for a stop to fighting, a humanitarian response at scale, the release of all hostages, and the delivery of the two sovereign states of Israel and Palestine that ensures peace, security, and justice for both countries. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, the delegation of Sierra Leone would like to thank Algeria for proposing and facilitating efforts to agree to a resolution that would have inter alia led to an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. We further thank the Algerian delegation for leading a reasonable, transparent, and inclusive process. Sierra Leone voted in favor of the draft resolution because of the imperative for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The Security Council is mandated to act promptly and effectively in order to maintain international peace and security. The Council has had its attention called to the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and for it to act under Article 99 of the UN Charter by the Secretary General. Some members of the Security Council have had the opportunity to visit both Rafah crossing from the Egyptian border and Israel, including representatives of the delegation of Sierra Leone. The assessment therefrom has been that only a humanitarian ceasefire will put an end to the unbearable killings in Gaza, and certainly the looming and unthinkable catastrophe in Rafah. Sierra Leone appreciates and commends member states embarking on diplomatic engagement with parties to the conflict to secure a prolonged pause to the hostilities. But while we do so, we remain worried that reaching a meaningful conclusion in practical terms takes time, a luxury that cannot be afforded by the suffering Palestinian people, the families of the hostages, and the hostages themselves. The other main organs of the United Nations have acted timeously and effectively in this tragic conflict. The UN General Assembly has adopted resolutions ES 1021 and ES 1022, with the overwhelming majority demanding in the latter an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The Secretary General of the UN invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, last used over half a century ago, to warn us in this council of the humanitarian catastrophe we now see in Gaza. As council members, we were urged to demand an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The International Court of Justice has acted promptly and rightly when called upon to do so by South Africa. Following the request for indication of provisional measures, the ICJ, in its 26 January 2024 order, in the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel, inter alia specifically ordered, and I quote, that the state of Israel shall take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to address the adverse conditions of life faced by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, end of quote. The court deemed it necessary to emphasize that all parties to the conflict in the Gaza Strip are bound by international humanitarian law. It expressed its grave concern that the fate of the hostages abducted during the attack in Israel on 7th October 2023 and held since then by Hamas and other armed groups, and calls for their immediate and unconditional release. The ICJ further reminded the parties that the provisional measures ordered under Article 41 of the ICJ statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. Sierra Leone is of the view that in the absence of any prima facie change in the current perilous humanitarian conditions prevailing in Gaza, coupled with the continuing perpetuation of the hostage situation following the 26 January 2024 order of the ICJ, the UN Security Council is now more than ever compelled to act, to use the myriad of tools available to us as a council to save human lives and put a check on the mounting death toll and inordinate destruction of civilian objects. Madam President, it is extremely worrisome that after over 130 days in the conflict, a draft resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, demanding the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, rejecting forced displacement of the Palestinians, reiterating the call for full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access into Gaza, and the optimal political solution of a two-state solution could not be adopted, which we deeply regret. At this stage, with the immense suffering, death, and anguish in Gaza, the Security Council must not relent until a complete halt to the continuing hostilities in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank is achieved. To do otherwise is to accept passively the prevalent criticisms of dysfunctionality of this council. Meanwhile, the reality in Gaza is that of famine-like conditions, malnutrition, displacement, and the spread of infectious diseases, and the potential for spillover of the conflict in the wider region. Our failure to act extinguishes hope, the hope that 1.3 million Palestinians in Rafah have supplicated to us, and beyond this, the hope that humanity has placed in us as members to deliver on the Council's mandate. This must awaken our resolve to act. In closing, Madam President, Sierra Leone sincerely looks forward to not only having a positive outcome from the ongoing diplomatic negotiations being mediated by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, but also as a Security Council will have a product that will call for a full and unconditional humanitarian ceasefire and release of all hostages. This, we hope, will lead to an end in the fighting and alleviate the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Señora Presidenta, agradezco a Argelia por el proyecto de resolución presentado. El Ecuador ha votado a favor del mismo debido a que considera que el Consejo debe pronunciarse frente a una situación humanitaria en constante deterioro con miles de víctimas inocentes. El proyecto que hemos votado no es perfecto, ni se han incluido en él todos los puntos que consideramos apropiados, pero ha sido presentado luego de un proceso de negociación e incluye elementos necesarios ante una situación que se agrava minuto a minuto. En lo principal, el texto que acabamos de votar demanda un cese al fuego humanitario que permitiría aliviar la situación de la población civil, al tiempo que exige la liberación inmediata e incondicional de todos los rehenes y deplora la violencia contra civiles y todos los actos de terrorismo, incluyendo implícitamente los execrables actos cometidos por Hamas en octubre pasado. Sin embargo, cabe mencionar que el Ecuador, al igual que varios miembros del Consejo, ha requerido insistentemente que el texto contenga una condena explícita a los actos terroristas de Hamas. Lamentamos que no se haya incluido en el texto esta condena, pues consideramos que es indispensable señalar claramente las responsabilidades que son evidentes en el presente para luego demandar también las responsabilidades que se conocerán en el futuro. El Ecuador, señora Presidenta, lamenta que en esta ocasión no se haya podido adoptar una resolución y continuará trabajando para que el Consejo pueda pronunciarse y actuar efectivamente mediante una adopción exitosa. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, уважаемые коллеги, сегодня мы стали свидетелями очередной черной страницы в истории Совета Безопасности ООН. Ее вновь написала делегация Соединенных Штатов, которая преследует всю ту же цель – покрывать своего ближайшего ближневосточного союзника и максимально тянуть время, чтобы он смог завершить свои бесчеловечные планы в отношении Газы, а именно выдавить из сектора палестинцев и полностью зачистить анклав, причем в прямом смысле, превратив его в необитаемую территорию. В этих условиях в политических кругах Израиля не стесняются рассуждать в категориях, которые полностью исключают двухгосударственное решение. Вновь противопоставив призывы прекратить бойню в Газе и обеспечить прекращение огня требованием осудить действия Хамас, наши американские коллеги лицемерно умолчали о том, что 18 октября именно они уже заветировали бразильский проект резолюции с таким осуждением. Алжирский проект был способен переломить эту ситуацию и остановить уничтожение палестинцев в Газе. К сожалению, очередное, уже четвертое по счету вето Соединенных Штатов этому помешало и обрекло на гибель новые тысячи мирных газовитян. Однако все должны понимать, что такой результат – это не провал работы Совета Безопасности ООН, который сегодня был фактически един, а деструктивная линия единственного его члена Соединенных Штатов. Вся полнота ответственности за последствия ложится на Вашингтон, как бы он ни старался от нее увильнуть, рассказывая о своих важных посреднических усилиях. Каким бы горьким ни было послевкусие сегодняшнего голосования, мы не настроены опускать руки. Требование Совета Безопасности ООН к сторонам о немедленном прекращении огня остается императивным. Без него любой продукт Совета будет лишен практического смысла. Все мы имели возможность убедиться в этом на примере беззубых гуманитарных резолюций по Газе, ранее принятых Советом. Они все так и остались на бумаге, потому что, как мы и предупреждали, в условиях активных боевых действий невозможно ни оказание гуманитарной помощи, ни мониторинг гуманитарных пауз. Что касается американского текста, который ранее сегодня так активно рекламировала постоянный представитель Соединенных Штатов, то, насколько нам известно, он даже не был еще официально распространен в Совете, не говоря уже о том, что не было никакого его содержательного обсуждения. Поэтому пока все это выглядит как очевидный спойлер, призванный отвлечь внимание от очередного постыдного вето Соединенных Штатов, наложенного на остро необходимую резолюцию о прекращении огня в Газе. Призываем членов Совета не верить лукавым и лицемерным увещеваниям о том, что надо подождать еще немного. Совет Безопасности и весь мир ждали 5 месяцев, и каждый час этого ожидания приносит новые человеческие жертвы. Американский проект не содержит, подчеркиваю, не содержит призыва к немедленному прекращению огня в Газе. В нем идет речь только о временном, да и то, когда сложатся условия. Так что никакой реальной альтернативой заветированному сегодня Соединенными Штатами алжирскому проекту американское детище не является и являться не может. Это всего лишь еще одна недобросовестная попытка Вашингтона оттянуть время в интересах Израиля и дать ему возможность окончательно решить палестинский вопрос. Наша общая задача – помешать этим замыслам и добиться справедливого мира между Израилем и Палестиной на основе решений Совета Безопасности и Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН. Давайте вместе ее решать. Возможно, когда-то и у наших американских коллег наконец-то проснется совесть.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. سيد الرئيس، بداية أود أن أعرب عن امتناني لجميع أعضاء هذا المجلس لمشاركتهم البناءة طوال عملية التفاوض. كما أشكر جميع الدول التي صوتت لصالح مشروع القرار، وحتى تلك التي لم تعترض عن اعتماد هذا المشروع. هذا المشروع الذي يطالب أساساً بوقف إطلاق النار في غزة. لقد كان مشروع القرار هذا يحمل رسالة قوية إلى الفلسطينيين مفادها أن العالم لا يقف صامتاً أمام محنتهم، لكن ومع الأسف مجلس الأمن فشل مرة أخرى، فشل في أن يرتقي إلى مستوى نداءات الشعوب وتطلعاتها. هذا الفشل الذي لا يعفيه من القيام بالمسؤولية ولا يعفيه المجموعة الدولية من إجابتها تجاه الشعب الفلسطيني الأعزل، ولا يعفي سلطات الاحتلال من واجب تنفيذ التدابير التحفظية لمحكمة العدل الدولية. لقد حان الوقت لكي يتوقف العدوان ونتمكن من تسهيل وصول المساعدة الإنسانية إلى جميع أحياء غزة. من الواضح أن قرارين 27/12 و27/20 لم يحققا النتاج المرجو، وأن المساعدات لا تلبي الحد الأدنى للفلسطينيين. علينا أن نعترف أن وقف إطلاق النار وحده هو ما يحقق الهدف المنشود. سيد الرئيس، إن الوضع الحالي يفرض على الجميع، مثل ما أكده رئيس الجمهورية السيد عبد المجيد تبون، العمل على إعلان مبادئ ومقاصد الأمم المتحدة وتوفير الحماية اللازمة للشعب الفلسطيني ووضع حد للظلم التاريخي المسلط عليه. سيد الرئيس، إن شعوب منطقتنا كانت ولا تزال تنظر إلى مجلس الأمن باعتباره عنوان الشرعية الدولية، لكنه مع الأسف خذلها مرة أخرى. إن رسالتنا اليوم لكم هي أنه على المجموعة الدولية أن تتجاوب مع مطالب وقف القتل الذي يستهدف الفلسطينيين، وذلك من خلال المطالبة بوقف إطلاق النار فوراً، وأنه على من يعرقل ذلك أن يراجع سياسته وحساباته، لأن القرارات الخاطئة لليوم تحسد منطقتنا والعالم نتائجها غدا عنفاً وعدم استقرار. فأسألوا أنفسكم وضمائركم عن نتائج قراراتكم، وكيف سيحكم عليكم التاريخ. سيد الرئيس، قبل أن أختم أقول للجميع أننا سندفن شهدائنا هذا المساء برفح، بغزة، بكل فلسطين، وأن الجزائر ستعود غدا باسم الأمة العربية وباسم الأمة الإسلامية وباسم أحرار العالم. ومعنا أرواح الآلاف من الأبرياء التي أزهقها المحتل الإسرائيلي من دون حساب ولا عقاب. ستعود الجزائر لتدق أبواب مجلس الأمن مرة أخرى وتطالب بوقف حمام الدم في فلسطين. ولن نتوقف حتى يتحمل هذا المجلس كامل مسؤولياته ويفرض وقفا إطلاق النار فوريا، فإن لنا نفوسا لا تمل وعزيمة لا تكل. وشكرا.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Guyana. Colleagues, Guyana is disappointed that this council has once again been unable to deliver a ceasefire for the people of Gaza. A ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and others trapped in the war zone that Gaza has become. The delegation of Algeria has approached the tabling of this resolution with great patience, transparency, and inclusivity. They have listened to all sides, acquiescing to requests for additional time to be given to other efforts underway. It has been almost 3 weeks since the draft was circulated, and we still find ourselves at square one. In that time, almost 2,000 more Palestinians were killed in Gaza, another 2,000 more injured. In those 3 weeks, every aspect of life in Gaza has gotten worse. Internal displacement has increased, with a serious crisis underway in Rafah. Food insecurity continued to worsen, with the latest Integrated Food Security and Nutrition Phase Classification, IPC, report stating that Gaza now has the highest share of persons facing devastating levels of acute food insecurity that the IPC has ever classified for any given area or country. The humanitarian situation has been described as increasingly severe. Humanitarian access is extremely limited, and people's desperation has led them to looting aid trucks to secure a morsel of food. The population is in dire straits. The most vulnerable among them, including children, the elderly, and people with underlying conditions, are especially vulnerable to malnutrition. And all of this is happening in freezing temperatures. In that time, we have also seen a further hardening of positions for the worse. For example, we have heard the determination of the Israeli government to proceed with a ground operation in Rafah despite the strong urgings to the contrary by many of its friends and partners and others in the international community. We know what a ground operation in Rafah would mean for the people who were driven there by the Israeli Defense Force. The ICJ orders of 26th of January are being completely ignored, as though there is no obligation to adhere to them. UN personnel are continuing to operate in Gaza under these extremely dangerous circumstances, with unprecedented numbers of them killed since 7th of October. Deconfliction mechanisms are not being respected, so everyone is at risk and nowhere is safe. Dear colleagues, what else needs to happen to act for the people in Gaza? How many more lives must be lost? How many more must be maimed? How many more? We need a ceasefire now. Resolutions 2712 and 2720 cannot be fully implemented if there is no ceasefire. The longer we take to agree on the need for a ceasefire, the longer this council will be seen as being complicit in what is taking place in Gaza. To be clear, Guyana also calls for the release of all hostages taken on October 7th and Palestinians unlawfully detained in Israeli prisons without trial. Though progress has been stalled for decades, the two-state solution still remains the best option for a permanent and lasting resolution of the Palestinian question. The current situation in Gaza puts the two-state solution at great risk, especially given the rhetoric from some Israeli government officials. Guyana calls on this council to act now for Gaza and for the future of both Palestine and Israel. A peaceful and stable Israel depends on a peaceful and stable Palestine. The two are not mutually exclusive. And a peaceful Palestine and Israel is crucial for lasting peace and stability of the Middle East region. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Madam President, we thank you and your friendly country, Guyana, for your leadership of the Security Council. We thank Algeria for all its efforts and its statement that my brother Ammar delivered a few minutes ago in bringing forth the draft resolution on behalf of the Arab group that has just been voted regarding the grave situation that continues to be faced by the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip as Israel, the occupying power, carries on with its genocidal war. We also thank the 13 members of the Security Council who voted in favor of the draft, and we thank you also for your intense engagement with the Arab group led by our brother, the Ambassador of Algeria, during the course of the last 3 weeks, negotiating in good faith of trying to save the Palestinian people's lives in the Gaza Strip and not to allow the looming catastrophe flying over our heads and having a further catastrophe on the Gaza Strip. We sincerely thank you for that effort, for your principled position, and for your determination that a ceasefire has to be demanded, implemented now to save lives, to save the Gaza Strip, to save the 1.5 million Palestinians in the Rafah district. This draft resolution was brought to the Council precisely because Israel persists with the onslaught persists with every single grave breach it has been committing, despite the near unanimous calls by the international community for a ceasefire, and despite the ICJ provisional measures ordered to Israel to cease all acts of genocide and incitement to genocide, and to ensure humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, who every day are facing death and destruction and the torment of starvation and repeated forced displacement. It has been nearly 3 weeks since I last addressed the Council following the court's order appealing for action to be taken to ensure the implementation of the provisional measures, to ensure a ceasefire that would protect the Palestinian people and avert the further ravaging of their lives by the Israeli onslaught. But our appeals have regrettably been to no avail. Between our last council session on the 31st of January and today, the casualty toll has risen from 26,000 Palestinians killed by the Israeli occupying forces to now almost 30,000 people killed and more than 69,000 people injured. This means that in just the past 20 days alone, Israel has killed nearly 4,000 more Palestinian children, women, and men in just 20 days. This is a deplorable consequence of inaction. It means more than 200 Palestinians killed every day. It means that by the time this Security Council session ends, more than 25 Palestinians will have been killed. It means more babies will be murdered, wounded, amputated, and orphaned. More children will die of hunger and hypothermia and disease. It means the continued threat of the further forced displacement of families, the looming danger of a mass expulsion or worse, slaughter of the nearly 1.5 million people in Rafah who have nowhere to flee, no protection whatsoever. It means the continued deprivation of the entire population of Gaza, left without food, water, medicine, and shelter, essential to alleviate suffering and ensure survival. It means that the human lives that could have been spared and saved are instead being forsaken to Israel's genocidal war machine, deliberately, knowingly, by those who oppose a ceasefire. We all know this. We know the staggering figures. We have heard the warning from the Secretary General, the heads of all UN agencies on the ground, dozens of independent special rapporteurs and humanitarian and human rights agencies the world over. We have seen it with our own eyes in pictures and videos that have seared and stained our collective conscience and broken our hearts and our humanity. In the face of Israel's brazen violation of the ICJ order, the court sent another warning, issued another decision on 16 February, reminding Israel that it is bound to fully comply with its obligations under the Genocide Convention and all the provisional measures ordered by the court on 26 January. The court also had to remind Israel that its obligations are immediate and should be effective. The call for ceasefire should have been agreed to long time ago. What threshold needs to be crossed for this council to finally demand a ceasefire? What could be more serious than the crime than genocide? History, as my brother Ammar said, is going to judge the council harshly. It is already doing so, impairing its credibility and authority in the eyes of people all over the world, perhaps irreparably. But we will not be complacent in this inaction. We have a duty to our people to seek every possible pathway to bring an end to the slaughter, an end to the trauma and terror, an end to the threats to expel them from their land. We will not be silent, and we will act with every legitimate means to uphold our sacred obligations to defend and protect our people and to pursue justice for them. That is why we have come back to the Security Council over and over again, imploring it to act, to protect our people. That is why we will not relent in seeking accountability, calling on the Council, the General Assembly, and all states to act in line with the Charter and all obligations under international law without selectivity, without exception. We will not stop demanding accountability for the war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide that Israel is perpetrating against the Palestinian people. But accountability must move beyond words in these chambers. It must mean real consequences for the occupying power for its criminal behavior. To this end, I just have returned around midnight last night from The Hague, where the state of Palestine stood before the ICJ, appealing to the court for justice after more than 75 years of Nakba, 56 years of belligerent occupation, 17 years of blockade, and nearly 140 days of vindictive, punitive siege and massacres perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, which is a genocide. What crimes has Israel not committed yet? We have gone to the court along with an unprecedented number of countries to confront the Israeli impunity that has made life a living hell for the Palestinian people, appealing for an immediate and complete end to this illegal colonial occupation and apartheid regime, the root cause of all the ills our people are suffering, including this genocidal war. The court has undertaken its solemn duties, acting swiftly both in response to the case brought by South Africa against Israel under the Genocide Convention and in response to the General Assembly's request for advisory opinion, which we hope will be a true turning point in the quest for accountability and for justice for the Palestinian people. When will the Security Council finally undertake its solemn duties? When will the Council act to demand the ceasefire that has been demanded by the rest of the international community majority for months now? The veto of this draft resolution is not only regrettable after weeks of consultations with every single council member and after endless patience by the state of Palestine, the Arab states, and nearly the entire international community that for months have demanded a ceasefire. It is absolutely reckless and dangerous against shielding Israel even as it commits the most shocking crimes while exposing millions of innocent Palestinian civilians to its wrath and more untold horrors. It is not Israel that should be protected by the veto. It is Palestinian children, women, and men who must be protected by this council acting now. Only with a ceasefire can we give a chance for life, for Resolution 2712 and 2720 to be implemented, as the President of the Security Council has indicated correctly. Ceasefire would allow these two resolutions to be implemented for a humanitarian assistance to reach the millions of desperate people in need, for UNRWA and other UN agencies to deliver life-saving aid, and a chance for our collective efforts to chart a path for justice and peace. And as long as the Council fails to demand a ceasefire, it will be considered not only derelict in its duties, but an enabler of the most horrific crimes we are witnessing in the Gaza Strip, in these days in Gaza. The message given today to Israel with this veto is that it can continue to get away with murder. Israel cannot and should not and will not get away with it. We will not allow it. This veto does not absolve Israel of its obligations, nor of those who shield it. Not here in the Security Council, not in the ICJ, and not anywhere. Even if the Security Council continues to shirk its responsibilities, to be obstructed by the veto of a permanent member over and over, the other organs of the international system are upholding their responsibilities. And one day or another, Palestinian children will not be viewed as a demography threat, but as children with a right to life and to fulfill their hopes and dreams. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Since October 7th, this Council has voted upon numerous resolutions constructed around the same flawed theme, the concept of a ceasefire. This word is constantly mentioned in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, and by UN officials and agencies, as if it is a silver bullet, a magical solution to all of the region's problems. For the past 137 days, the only solution discussed on the international stage is this absurd notion of a ceasefire. Will a ceasefire bring home the hostages? Will a ceasefire eliminate Hamas? Will a ceasefire disarm Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all the other Iranian terrorist proxies in our region? Will a ceasefire end the genocidal ambitions of Palestinian terror groups aiming for Israel's annihilation? We're still waiting for President Abbas to condemn the October 7th massacre. What exactly will this silver bullet ceasefire achieve? A ceasefire achieves one thing and one thing only: the survival of Hamas. Exactly the opposite of how it's portrayed. A ceasefire is a death sentence for many more Israelis and Gazans. Supporting a ceasefire means supporting the survival of jihadist terrorists that will continue butchering Israelis and endlessly spilling the blood of innocents. There is a reason, dear colleagues, that the ICJ unanimously and rightly rejected South Africa's attempt to undermine Israel's right to defend itself by calling for a ceasefire. The very idea that Israel would be denied this fundamental right, while Hamas would be free to continue its terror and hold hostages, is morally unthinkable, because as you know, Hamas is not going to even read your resolutions. So why are some on this council so determined to impose harmful measures that the ICJ refused to take? You all know the answers. Colleagues, a ceasefire is the epitome of a kick the can down the road policy. A ceasefire today means immunity for baby killers and rapists. It's an easy way to make this problem an issue for another day. With a ceasefire in place, Hamas will regroup, rearm, and their next attempt at genocide against Israelis will only be a question of when, not if. Hamas has sworn publicly to commit the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again until Israel is annihilated. So why is the Council, charged with security, is so fixated on aiding these monsters to stay in power? Just yesterday, Israel exposed footage proving that Shiri Bibas and her two children, 4-year-old Ariel and 1-year-old Kfir, were taken to Gaza alive. So tell me, distinguished council members, a 4-year-old and a baby were taken hostage by Hamas, among others, and most of you choose to support a ceasefire? Why do you want to leave them in Gaza? Do you not see how immoral that is? And what kind of precedent this would set for terrorists around the globe? Did you think about baby Kfir when you voted on this resolution? A resolution that would ensure that Kfir, along with 133 other hostages, remain in dark terror tunnels? Did you think about Noa Argamani? Noa's look of sheer horror as she violently separated from her boyfriend Avinoam Or and taken to Gaza on the back of a motorbike has become a symbol of the hostages' plight. In the heart-wrenching video, you can hear Noa screaming and pleading with the terrorists not to abduct her. Noa's mother, Liora, born Chong Hong Lee, a Chinese-Israeli citizen originally from Wuhan, is terminally ill with stage 4 brain cancer. All she asks is that she can hug Noa, her only daughter, one last time before she succumbs to her illness. To my Chinese colleague, I ask you, in the name of Liora Chong Hong Lee, rather than pushing for a harmful ceasefire which will keep Noa in Gaza, I urge you, pressure Hamas to release Noa so that her mother can see Noa one last time before her death. Colleagues, jihadists around the globe see that the body mandated to uphold international security is willing to allow murderous Hamas rapists to continue their reign of terror. Your calls for a ceasefire empower Hamas, giving them hope to stay in power. This does not ensure security, it prevents it. You truly want a ceasefire? Well, Israel also wants a ceasefire. Your children are not the ones that are falling in battle against bloodthirsty terrorists. They are ours. If Hamas survives, it will be our children that Hamas will murder in cold blood again. Israel seeks a ceasefire, but there is only one formula that we are willing to accept. All of our hostages must be released, and Hamas must turn themselves in. Colleagues, the Algerian resolution not only empowers jihadists by calling for a ceasefire, it also fails, again, to condemn Hamas for their heinous crimes. Not condemning Hamas's atrocities has now become a tradition here. It's tragic. Hamas Nazis invaded Israel, deliberately murdering families, raping women and girls, and destroying everything they could get their hands on. They are brutal terrorists who took pride in their barbarism. Yet, not once, not even once since October 7th, has this council or any UN body condemned Hamas and their violence. One day, we mentioned history here, when historians studied the reasons why the UN lost its standing and influence, the inability of this organization to condemn terrorists that slaughter children will be one of the driving factors. Mark my words. But the impact of this council's decisions spread much further than this room. If this council is incapable of condemning Hamas, UN officials feel like they have further legitimacy to whitewash Hamas. Mere days ago, Under-Secretary General Griffith stated that Hamas is not a terrorist group, but a political movement. Is the intentional brutal murder of hundreds of civilians not terror? Is the systematic rape of women not terror? Is beheading and burning children alive not terror? We all know Hamas is a terrorist organization, yet by staying silent in the face of Hamas's crimes and not condemning them, you allow such lies to perpetuate. Your politicized decision of silence promotes the falsehoods that Hamas can be reasoned with, that they are not the bloodthirsty terrorists that they are. And this is the stance that the UN adopts and promotes. Condemn Hamas as a council, condemn their atrocities, rid this institution of its shame. Do it for the sake of those butchered, for the sake of the hostages, for the sake of morality and truth. It's in your hands. Colleagues, some of you have approached me and asked me why Israel is so critical of the UN and its agencies. The recent event over the past weeks have hopefully made it clearer to you. 1 week ago, Special Rapporteur Albanese libelously stated that the victims of October 7th were not murdered for their identity, but in response to Israel's so-called oppression. This is victim blaming and a clear justification of terror. But for some UN employees, even poisonous words are not enough. Dozens of UNRWA employees took active roles in the October 7th massacre, while many more praised the savage attack. Faisal Ali Musallem El-Naami, an UNRWA social worker, stuffed the body of Jonathan Samirano into a truck to be taken to Gaza. A Hamas data center was located directly underneath UNRWA headquarters in Gaza, connected to UNRWA's power supply, and terror tunnels have been found running underneath various UNRWA facilities, schools, everything. Out of UNRWA's 1,300 employees in Gaza, 12%, I repeat, 12% are members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and at least 236 of them are active terrorists in these organizations' armed wings. UNRWA has been proven to be an instrumental part of Hamas's terror machine, which makes UNRWA itself a terrorist organization. Yet, rather than take responsibility for the weaponization of this murderous UN agency, Commissioner General Lazzarini has chosen to say that he had no knowledge of Hamas's hold on his own agency. This is blatantly false. Israel exposed terror tunnels under UNRWA schools and supplied evidence of Hamas's exploitation of UNRWA. You can see it in my Twitter account. I personally sent letters to the Commissioner General and the Secretary General. We implored them for years to carry out a comprehensive search of all UNRWA facilities in Gaza. Yet not only did they refuse, they chose to bury their heads in the sand and ignore the reality. This is why every report, every statement or number provided by the UN cannot be trusted. In Gaza, dear colleagues, Hamas is the UN and the UN is Hamas. Distinguished council members, this ostrich tactic, burying one's head in the sand, is the modus operandi among UN leadership. Yet, no matter how deep one's head is buried, it will not change the reality on the ground. A terrorist is a terrorist. A terror organization is a terror organization. And a law-abiding liberal democracy will remain as such. Even if here at the UN, for political reasons, light becomes darkness and day becomes night. This is also the case with the escalating situation on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. For years, and you heard it here, for years Israel has called for this council to impose the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701. Yet, for years, the UN has opted for the ostrich tactic. Tragically, This is no longer a situation that can be ignored. The clock is ticking. It is not a matter of years, but weeks before Israel will be forced to implement Resolution 1701 ourselves. Just yesterday, a Hezbollah drone was downed while flying over the Sea of Galilee, deep, deep inside Israel. Over 2,000 Hezbollah missiles and rockets have rained down on the cities of Israel's north. 2,000. And nearly 100,000 residents of northern Israel have been displaced due to the threat posed by Hezbollah, with, of course, Iran's backing. A ceasefire in Gaza is not only destructive for Israel and the Palestinians, it also ensures that a blind eye is turned to what is unfolding in the rest of the region. Be it the Houthis' relentless attacks on maritime trade, pro-Iran militias targeting even American service members, or Hezbollah's constant bombardment of Israel's north. The clock is ticking, and sadly, we will be forced to take decisive action. Terror will never be tolerated. Madam President, this Council must put politics aside for the sake of its mandate. A ceasefire that allows Hamas to remain in power means ensured death and destruction. Ignoring Hamas's atrocities and not condemning them means empowering terrorists worldwide. And focusing only on Gaza while looking away from the terror aggression across the region will lead to a future that none of us seek. The Security Council must fulfill its mandate. It must side with Israel against the forces of evil, and it must face reality. Reality is not found when one's head is buried in the sand. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement. I shall now give the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس. أود أن أهنئ بلدكم الصديق على رئاسة المجلس، ويسرني أن أدلي بهذا البيان باسم دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، وهي بلادي دولة قطر والمملكة العربية السعودية ودولة الكويت ودولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة وسلطنة عمان ومملكة البحرين، وننضم للبيان الذي ستدلي به المجموعة العربية بعد قليل. السيد الرئيس، ينعقد اجتماعنا اليوم في ظل ظروف بالغة الخطورة، حيث تحول الوضع في قطاع غزة إلى أسوأ كارثة إنسانية يشهدها العالم. فبحسب التقارير الأممية ليس في قطاع غزة مكان آمن، وأصبح تقريبا كل سكانه الذي يتجاوز عددهم 2,000,000 شخص من النازحين والمعرضين للمجاعة. إن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية وفي ظل اقتراب عدوان الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ضد الأشقاء الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة من شهره الخامس تحذر وبشدة من ازدياد وتيرة الهجمات العسكرية على القطاع ومضاعفة عدد الضحايا، حيث باتت أعدادهم تشارف على 100,000 إنسان، معظمهم من النساء والأطفال، ما بين القتلى والمصابين والمفقودين تحت الأنقاض. وننوه في هذا السياق إلى تصريحات عدد من المسؤولين الدوليين الذين أكدوا أنهم لم يشهدوا مثيلاً للوضع الراهن في غزة، الأمر الذي دفع الأمين العام إلى مخاطبة مجلسكم الموقر استناداً للمادة 99 من الميثاق، محذراً من خطر انهيار المنظومة الإنسانية والنظام العام في القطاع، وداعياً إلى وقف إطلاق نار إنساني عاجل. ونشدد هنا على ضرورة التنفيذ الكامل لقراري المجلس رقم 2712 و2720. السيدة الرئيسة تدين دول مجلس التعاون بأشد العبارات التهديدات الإسرائيلية المتعلقة بشن عملية عسكرية على مدينة رفح جنوب قطاع غزة، ونحذر من أن هذه التهديدات تنذر بتصعيد مستويات العنف وزعزعة الاستقرار والأمن في المنطقة. كما ندين بأقوى العبارات محاولات التهجير القسري للسكان المدنيين، ونرفض رفضاً قاطعاً أي عملية عسكرية في مدينة رفح، ونحذر من وقوع كارثة إنسانية جديدة فيها، حيث أصبحت ملاذاً أخيراً لمئات الآلاف من النازحين داخل القطاع. وفي ذات السياق تعرب دول مجلس التعاون عن أسفها البالغ والعميق حيال تعليق بعض الدول المانحة تمويلها لوكالة الأونروا، وخاصة في ظل الأوضاع الإنسانية الخطيرة الراهنة، حيث يعتمد على الوكالة 5 ملايين من الفلسطينيين لا سيما في قطاع غزة. وفي هذا الصدد نضم صوتنا للأمين العام في مناشدته للدول التي علقت دعمها للأونروا بمراجعة قراراتها واستئناف تمويلها للوكالة، وذلك حتى لا تتعمق الكارثة الإنسانية الحالية في غزة أكثر مما هي عليه، وتجدد دولنا موقفها الثابت من عدالة القضية الفلسطينية والحقوق المشروعة للشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق، وإقامة دولته المستقلة على حدود عام 1767 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. السيدة الرئيسة تعرب دول مجلس التعاون عن تقديرها للمسار التفاوضي المستمر حول الوصول لاتفاق إطاري لهدنة إنسانية جديدة في قطاع غزة بتيسير من بلاد دولة قطر وجمهورية مصر العربية والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وذلك بغية إطلاق سراح الأسرى والمحتجزين وضمان وصول المزيد من المساعدات الإنسانية والإغاثية إلى قطاع غزة وحماية المدنيين. السيدة الرئيسة تعرب دول مجلس التعاون عن أسفها البالغ لفشل المجلس اليوم في اعتماد مشروع القرار المقدم من الجزائر والمدعوم من المجموعة العربية، والذي أيدته أغلبية أعضاء المجلس، كونه مشروع قرار إنساني في مضمونه ويتسق مع القانون الدولي الإنساني. ونود التنويه في هذا الصدد إلى أن دولنا سوف تستمر في جهودها في العمل مع الشركاء للسعي في كل المسارات لضمان الوصول إلى وقف إطلاق نار إنساني فوري في قطاع غزة، حقناً لدماء أشقائنا الفلسطينيين في القطاع، ولضمان وصول مزيد من المساعدات الإنسانية والإغاثية وحماية المدنيين. وشكراً لكم السيدة الرئيسة.
I thank the representative of Qatar for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
شكراً السيدة الرئيسة. أتشرف بإلقاء هذا البيان باسم المجموعة العربية، وأود في البداية أن أهنئكم وبلدكم غيانا على تولي رئاسة المجلس لهذا الشهر، وأعرب لكم عن الشكر لعقد هذه الجلسة. ونتقدم بالشكر إلى الجزائر العضو العربي في المجلس على مبادرتها بتقديم مشروع القرار ومساعيها طوال مسار المفاوضات من أجل الحفاظ على وحدة المجلس والتوصل إلى توافق حول مطلب وقف إطلاق النار الفوري لأسباب إنسانية لا تخطئها العين، وباعتباره الإجراء الأكثر إلحاحاً في ظل الأوضاع الكارثية التي تردى فيها قطاع غزة والمعاناة الإنسانية الرهيبة للسكان الفلسطينيين نتيجة مواصلة سلطات الاحتلال لعدوانها وجرائم الحرب والإبادة الجماعية التي تقترفها في حق الشعب الفلسطيني بلا هوادة، علاوة على إمعانها في إجراءات العقاب الجماعي ومنع المساعدات الإنسانية والطبية والغذاء والماء والوقود وكل وسائل الحياة. السيدة الرئيسة، تتوجه المجموعة العربية بالشكر للدول الأعضاء في مجلس الأمن التي ساهمت بكل إيجابية وبشكل بناء في مسار المفاوضات بخصوص مشروع القرار وصوتت لفائدته، وبقدر ما تعرب عن أسفها لفشل المجلس في اعتماد مشروع القرار وعجزه مرة أخرى عن الاضطلاع بمسؤوليته القانونية والأخلاقية باعتباره الجهاز الرئيسي المسؤول عن حفظ الأمن والسلم الدوليين، فإنها تجدد تأكيد تمسكها كما العديد من دول العالم وأعضاء مجلس الأمن والمنظمات الإنسانية والأممية بضرورة إقرار وقف فوري لإطلاق النار ومنع تنفيذ سلطات الاحتلال لمخططها الذي يستهدف أكثر من 1.5 مليون فلسطيني في رفح، ومنع تكرار جرائم التهجير القسري للفلسطينيين وإفراغ الأرض الفلسطينية من سكانها. وتعتبر المجموعة العربية أنه من غير المقبول بكل المقاييس أن يظل مجلس الأمن مرتهنا للحسابات السياسية والمصالح الضيقة في حين تتواصل الاعتداءات اليومية على الشعب الفلسطيني وتتعمق معاناته ويفقد الآلاف من أبنائه بمن فيهم الأطفال وكبار السن والنساء والمرضى. إن عجز مجلس الأمن اليوم عن التكلم بصوت واحد وإعلاء مبادئ القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني والحق في الحياة يوجه مرة أخرى الرسالة الخاطئة للقوة القائمة بالاحتلال ويطلق يدها لتواصل جرائمها واستهتارها بالشرعية الدولية واعتبار نفسها فوق القانون والمساءلة، كما يعمق أزمة الثقة في مصداقية هذا الجهاز الأممي الهام. وفي هذا السياق تجدد المجموعة العربية رفضها لسياسات الانحياز لمخططات سلطات الاحتلال وتوفير الحماية لها على حساب أرواح الآلاف من الفلسطينيين التي تزهق وأرضه التي تسرق عن طريق مخططات التهجير والاستيطان. وتؤكد المجموعة العربية رفضها لازدواجية المعايير التي ساهمت في إطالة أمد القضية الفلسطينية وفي عدم تنفيذ أي من القرارات الخاصة بها بكل ما رافق ذلك من مجازر وتنكيل في حق الشعب الفلسطيني وانتهاكات لحقوقه، وهي تطالب بالتعاطي مع كل القضايا والوضعيات بنفس المقاييس ودرجة الالتزام. كما تطالب المجموعة العربية المجتمع الدولي ومجلس الأمن بضمان توفير الحماية للفلسطينيين وتسريع دخول وإيصال المساعدات الإنسانية دون إعاقة إلى قطاع غزة، تنفيذاً لقراري مجلس الأمن 2712 و 2720. كما تؤكد على دعمها الكامل لجهود كبيرة منسق الأمم المتحدة للشؤون الإنسانية وإعادة الإعمار في غزة سيغريد كاغ ومساعيها للاستجابة للحالة الإنسانية الكارثية التي يشهدها القطاع. السيدة الرئيسة، إن الجهود الجارية للتوصل إلى اتفاق إطار لتبادل الأسرى والمحتجزين وإقرار هدنة لا تتعارض مع مطلب الوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار الذي لا يمكن إلا أن يساعد على تسهيل مثل هذه المساعي، ولا تفسير للإصرار على رفض اعتماد مشروع القرار الخاص بهذا المطلب وتمكين المجموعة الدولية ومجلس الأمن من التكلم بصوت واحد إلا سعي حكومة الاحتلال لمواصلة عملياتها العسكرية وتنفيذ مخططها الرامي إلى تهجير الفلسطينيين من أرضهم. ومن هذا المنطلق وإزاء هذا التوجه الذي يهدف إلى تحييد مجلس الأمن ومنعه من تحمل مسؤوليته التي يقرها ميثاق الأمم المتحدة في مثل هذه الأوضاع الكارثية، فإننا نتساءل عن محددات دور المجلس ومتى سيسمح له بالقيام بهذا الدور المفترض، وكم من روح بريئة يجب أن تزهق قبل أن يتحقق ذلك. ألا يكفي قتل أكثر من 28,000 وجرح حوالي 70,000 وتهجير أكثر من 1.3 مليون وتدمير كل البنى التحتية والمساكن والمستشفيات والمدارس ودور العبادة ومكاتب الأمم المتحدة وقتل العشرات من موظفي الوكالات الأممية والإنسانية والصحفيين؟ السيدة الرئيسة، كذلك تدين المجموعة العربية بأشد العبارات اعتداءات السلطة القائمة بالاحتلال المتكررة على أراضي كل من سوريا ولبنان وخرقها لسيادتهما وقتلها للمدنيين الأبرياء، وهو ما يقوض الأمن والسلم والاستقرار في المنطقة والعالم. ستواصل المجموعة العربية تحركاتها على جميع المستويات وفي كافة المحافل لتتحمل المجموعة الدولية مسؤوليتها بعيداً عن الانتقائية والحسابات السياسية، ولتفرض على سلطات الاحتلال احترام القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني وتضع حداً لمخططاتها وانتهاكاتها الجسيمة بحق الشعب الفلسطيني. شكراً سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Tunisia for his statement. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Egypt to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. السادة الأعضاء، لقد شهدنا صباح اليوم مجددا نموذجا صارخا من ازدواج المعايير، فقد أعاق الوفد الأمريكي للمرة الثالثة محاولة استصدار قرار من مجلس الأمن لإيقاف وقف إطلاق النار في غزة، رغم تصويت 13 عضوا من مجلس الأمن لصالح مشروع القرار الجزائري المقدم بدعم كامل من المجموعتين العربية والإسلامية في الأمم المتحدة. وبقدر العرفان للجزائر العضو العربي بمجلس الأمن على تقديم القرار، وبقدر الامتنان لكل من صوت لصالح القرار لصالح مشروع القرار، يعبر وفد مصر عن المزيد من الإحباط وخيبة الأمل إزاء استمرار عرقلة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية لمساعي وقف إطلاق النار عبر اطلاع الجهاز الرئيسي المنوط به حفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين بواجباته. السادة الأعضاء، أين يقف هذا التصويت الأمريكي إزاء المعاناة الإنسانية التي وصلت لحد الكارثة بعد الأسبوع العشرين من الحرب على غزة؟ وكيف يستقيم أن تتم دعوتنا إلى مجتمع دولي قائم على القواعد، فيما عندما نطلب تطبيق تلك القواعد لا نلقى سوى الآذان الصماء؟ أليس سكرتير عام الأمم المتحدة وإعماله للمادة 99 من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة بكاشف للإجراء المطلوب من مجلس الأمن؟ أليس القرار الصادر من محكمة العدل الدولية والذي طلب اتخاذ إجراءات محددة بكاشف للحاجة الفورية لوقف إطلاق النار؟ أليست تقارير مكتب تنسيق الشؤون الإنسانية ومنظمة الصحة العالمية والأونروا وما تعكسه بشأن كارثية الوضع الإنساني الراهن في غزة ولا سيما على الحدود مع مصر في رفح بكافية لتقنع الوفد الأمريكي بالتصويت لصالح وقف إطلاق النار بعد مرور 140 يوما على بدء النزاع وبعد أن فقد أكثر من 30,000 إنسان أغلبهم من النساء والأطفال حياتهم جراء الحرب الجائرة في غزة؟ سأل الأعضاء، مصر هي أول من أقام السلام مع إسرائيل من الدول العربية، ومصر هي أحرص الدول على استقرار منطقة الشرق الأوسط. وبينما يتواصل إخفاق مجلس الأمن في إيقاف الحرب، ستستمر مصر في تحمل العبء الأكبر سياسيا وأمنيا وإنسانيا جراء الأزمة، ولكنها ملتزمة بالعمل المضني والمتواصل على كافة الأصعدة لإيقاف نزيف الدماء، لإيقاف الحرب المدمرة، لاستعادة الأفق السياسي، لتحقيق آمال الشعبين الفلسطيني والإسرائيلي في الأمن والاستقرار وفقا لقرارات الشرعية الدولية، وإنشاء الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة على خطوط 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. سيدة الرئيسة، مصر تتفاوض وتتوسط بمنتهى الجدية بالتنسيق مع كل من الولايات المتحدة وقطر وإسرائيل والجانب الفلسطيني لسرعة إطلاق المحتجزين والرهائن والأسرى الفلسطينيين وسرعة دفع المساعدات الإنسانية بأقصى سرعة وبأكبر قدر ممكن لإنهاء الوضع الإنساني الكارثي في غزة، لإنقاذ الأشقاء الفلسطينيين من الحصار الجائر المفروض عليهم من سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، والتصدي لكافة المحاولات الإسرائيلية لفرض التهجير القسري للشعب الفلسطيني بهدف تصفية قضيته النبيلة. تناشد مصر مجلس الأمن وكل القوى الدولية المسؤولة إنقاذ خيار السلام عبر الإنفاذ الفوري لوقف إطلاق النار. هذا لن يعرقل جهود الوساطة الجارية، بل سيتيح لها الظروف المناسبة لتنجح. دعونا نتفاوض ونتوسط وسط انسياب المساعدات الإنسانية واستعادة الهدوء وتضميد جراح المصابين، خاصة الأطفال اليتامى والنساء الثكلى، بدلا من أن نتفاوض وسط الدمار والخراب الذي تخلفه آلة الحرب الإسرائيلية المدمرة. سيد الرئيس، سادة الأعضاء، نداء مصر لكم جميعا واضح وبسيط: أوقفوا إطلاق النار الآن. Ceasefire now. وأرجو ألا يخطئ أي طرف مجددا إدراك هذه الرسالة النبيلة والمباشرة، والتي لا تهدف سوى لحماية المدنيين دون حسابات سياسية. وتحذر مصر مجددا من المخاطر الكارثية والمحدقة بالأشقاء الفلسطينيين جراء الخطط الإسرائيلية المعلنة لاقتحام مدينة رفح، كما تحذر مصر من استمرار تدهور الوضع الإقليمي جراء استمرار هذه الحرب المدمرة. وشكرا السيدة الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. The representative of China has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and I now give them the floor.
谢谢主席。刚才以色列代表对中国代表团提出了一个问题， 我们要回答你的是，每一个生命都是宝贵的，都有权利得到保护。关于你提到以色列公民诺亚被扣押，他的母亲曾经是中国公民。前不久，我们的外交官在纽约，根据以色列常驻团的要求，会见了诺亚的朋友。跟诺亚的亲友家属一样，我们希望他早日回家。事实上，中国一直呼吁所有被扣押人员早日得到释放。为此，我们希望以色列在埃及、卡塔尔等斡旋下，同哈马斯进行的谈判能够取得进展。同时，就像我们多次强调的，集体惩罚巴勒斯坦平民绝对不是正确的回应。事实表明，只会适得其反。实现巴以和平的唯一出路是落实两国方案。当前形势下，避免更大灾难的当务之急是立即停火。我们希望以色列聆听国际社会压倒性的呼声，在认真听取安理会成员和其他成员发言后，做出正确的判断，而不是转移话题。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.